She found a deed pressed in her grandmother's Bible. It led to a cabin no one knew existed, and a secret that would force her to choose between a life of comfort and a legacy of truth. If you've ever felt like your whole life was a waiting room, then you know what my 18th birthday felt like. It wasn't a celebration, it was a deadline. The day I aged out of the system. If this is your first time here, maybe hit that subscribe button, because this is a place where we talk about the deadlines that don't come with a cake. We talk about what comes after. For me, what came after was a single cardboard box of my things and a bus ticket to a city where I knew no one. The only thing I truly owned was a grief so wide and so deep it felt like the only real home I had. My grandmother, Eleanor, had died 2 months earlier. She was the last piece of family I had, the final link to a history I barely understood. The state had managed her final affairs, which was a sterile, bureaucratic way of saying they had cleaned out her tiny, subsidized apartment and declared nothing of value was left. Nothing except one book they'd found under her pillow, her Bible. It was old, the leather cover worn smooth as river stone, the pages thin and soft as moth wings. It felt less like a book and more like a part of her. They gave it to me in a clear plastic bag, like it was evidence. Maybe it was. The social worker, a woman named Ms. Albright, with tired eyes and a kind but professional distance, handed it to me the morning I left. "This was your grandmother's," she said, her voice flat with the practiced neutrality of someone who delivers difficult news for a living. It was all she had. All she had. The words echoed in the empty space of the group home's hallway. I took the bag, the plastic crinkling under my fingers. It felt both impossibly heavy and completely weightless. For the next 2 months, I didn't open it. I couldn't. It sat in my box, a silent testament to a life I felt had been erased. A life of poverty, of quiet dignity, of secrets I was sure she had taken with her. I found a room to rent, a tiny space with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. I found a job washing dishes in a diner where the clatter of plates and the hiss of the industrial sprayer drowned out the sound of my own thoughts. It was a life built on the temporary, on the provisional. I was surviving, not living. One night, the loneliness was a physical presence in the room, a cold weight on my chest. I finally pulled the box from under my bed. My fingers trembled as I opened it. There were my few spare clothes, a handful of faded photographs, and the plastic-bagged Bible. I slipped it from its sterile cocoon. The leather was cool to the touch. It smelled of her, a faint scent of lavender and old paper. It was the smell of the hugs I could barely remember. I opened it, not to any particular page, just letting the spine fall open where it was most worn. It opened to the Psalms, her favorite. Tucked into the crease, so flat and thin I almost missed it, was a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a bookmark. It was stiff, official. My heart started a low, heavy drum against my ribs. I carefully unfolded it. The paper was thick, yellowed with age, covered in dense, archaic legal language. But I could make out the important words: deed of trust, property, and a name, Eleanor Vance, my grandmother. Below it, in a space for the grantee, was my name, Maya Vance. My breath caught in my throat. This was impossible. My grandmother had lived on state assistance her entire life, as far as I knew. She'd lived in apartments no bigger than my current room. The idea of her owning property was like imagining she could fly. I scanned the document, my eyes catching on the description of the property. It wasn't a city lot. It was 5 acres of land in a place called Sparrow Creek, a township I had never even heard of, hundreds of miles north. Taped to the bottom corner of the deed, with a piece of yellowed cellophane tape, was a single, ornate, old-fashioned brass key. It was heavy, skeletal, a fairy tale key. It didn't look like it could open anything in the modern world. A joke. It had to be a mistake, a cruel, elaborate joke left behind by a woman whose mind had perhaps wandered in her final years. But as I sat there, in the silence of my small, lonely room, tracing the shape of the key with my finger, a different feeling began to take root. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something sharper, more dangerous. It was curiosity. The next few weeks were a blur of doubt and frantic research. I spent my evenings at the public library, hunched over a computer that smelled of dust and disinfectant. Sparrow Creek was real. It was a tiny, unincorporated community in the most rural part of the state, a place the modern world seemed to have forgotten. Population 217. I found the county assessor's website and, with shaking hands, I typed in the parcel number from the deed. My heart hammered against my ribs. A result popped up. Owner, Eleanor Vance. Status, active. Taxes, paid in full. Paid in full for the next 50 years. An anonymous trust had been set up decades ago to pay them. It was real. The land, the cabin described in the property details, it was all real. It was hers. It was mine. The knowledge didn't feel like winning a lottery. It felt like a puzzle I didn't have the picture for. Why would she hide this? Why would a woman who struggled to afford groceries, who wore her coats until the seams frayed, be sitting on 5 acres of land with a paid-off cabin? Why did she never tell me? The questions were a swarm of bees in my head. The eviction notice that had been taped to my door a week earlier suddenly felt less like a death sentence and more like a sign. My landlord was selling the building. I had 30 days to get out. 30 days. I had no savings, no family to call, nowhere to go. I looked at the eviction notice in one hand and the brittle, folded deed in the other. One was the story of my life up to that point, a series of locked doors, of being told to move on. The other was a key. I didn't know what it opened. It could be a shack, a ruin, a lie. But it was the only door that wasn't closing in my face. I sold what little I had, a small television, a few books. I bought a one-way bus ticket north. The journey was long, a slow transition from the concrete and noise of the city to the sprawling green and silence of the countryside. The bus windows became a screen showing a life I'd never known. We passed rolling hills, dense forests, and small towns with single traffic lights. With every mile, the knot of fear in my stomach loosened just a little, replaced by a fragile sense of purpose. I was moving toward something, not just away from something else. It was a new feeling. The bus finally hissed to a stop in a town called Northwood, the closest stop to Sparrow Creek, which was still another 20 miles away. Northwood was quaint, a collection of brick buildings that looked like they hadn't changed in a century. A friendly woman at the general store told me there was no taxi service, no bus to Sparrow Creek. "Old Man Hemlock's place?" she said, her eyes widening slightly when I showed her the address on the deed. "That's way out past the ridge. No one's lived out there in ages." She pointed me toward a man named Silas who delivered mail and supplies to the outlying properties. For $20, he agreed to take me. Silas was a man of few words, his face a roadmap of wrinkles from a life spent outdoors. His pickup truck smelled of sawdust and coffee. We rattled down a paved road that quickly turned to gravel and then to a dirt track that was little more than 2 ruts in the earth. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches forming a canopy that dappled the light. "Not many folks come out this way," Silas said, breaking a long silence. "What's your business at the Hemlock place?" I hesitated. It was my grandmother's. He nodded slowly, a flicker of something. Recognition? Pity? In his eyes. "Eleanor's girl, huh? She was a good woman. Kept to herself." He knew her. The realization sent a jolt through me. In this forgotten place, she wasn't just a name on a state file, she was a person. She never mentioned this place to me, I said, the words feeling small and inadequate. Silas grunted. Some things are heavy. Don't need to carry them until you have to. The truck lurched to a stop at the end of the track. Before us was a wall of green, a thicket of overgrown bushes and tangled vines. A narrow, almost invisible path led into the woods. This is as far as I go, Silas said. Cabin's about a quarter-mile in. You sure you're all right? I looked at my single duffel bag, at the dense, silent woods, and then at the key clutched in my hand. I wasn't sure of anything, but I nodded. I'm sure. He helped me with my bag, his expression unreadable. If you need anything, you can find me at the post office in Northwood. Just be careful. It's wild out here. I thanked him, and he drove off, the sound of his engine fading until it was swallowed by the immense silence of the forest. I was alone, truly alone. The path was more of a suggestion than a trail. I pushed through waist-high ferns and ducked under low-hanging branches, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. My city sneakers were soaked within minutes. After what felt like an eternity, the trees thinned, and I stepped into a small clearing. And there it was. The cabin was small, made of dark, weathered logs, with a sagging porch and a stone chimney covered in moss. The roof was a patchwork of old shingles and green velvet moss. It looked less like a building and more like something that had grown out of the forest floor, something the woods were slowly reclaiming. It was beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. My heart was pounding, a mix of terror and a strange, unbidden sense of homecoming. I walked up the 3 creaking steps to the porch. A thick layer of dust and fallen leaves covered everything. The front door was solid oak, bleached gray by the sun and rain. The keyhole was framed by a tarnished brass plate. With a hand that was not quite steady, I slid the heavy key into the lock. It resisted, then turned with a loud, grating click that echoed in the silence. I pushed the door open. It swung inward on a single, protesting groan. The air that rushed out was stale, cold, and thick with the scent of time itself. It smelled of dust, of dry wood, of mice, and something else. Something faintly floral, like dried lavender. Her scent. I stepped inside, my bag dropping to the floor with a soft thud. The interior was a single room, larger than I expected. A fine layer of dust coated every surface, turning the whole world inside a soft, uniform gray. Sunlight streamed through a grimy window, illuminating swirling motes of dust like a galaxy of tiny stars. There was a stone fireplace, a simple wooden table with 2 chairs, a small kitchenette with a hand-pump sink, and a bed in the corner, neatly made, covered with a thick, handmade quilt. It was all simple, rustic, but well-made. This wasn't a shack, it was a home. It was a place someone had loved. My eyes scanned the room, taking in the details. A stack of books on a small shelf, a kerosene lamp on the table, a cast-iron skillet hanging by the hearth. And on the mantelpiece, above the fireplace, was a single, carved wooden box. It was dark cherry wood, intricately carved with vines and leaves. It seemed to be the only thing in the room that was free of dust, as if it had been recently placed there. I walked toward it, my boots echoing on the wooden floorboards. It felt like walking toward an altar. The box was locked, a small, simple lock that didn't look like it would stand up to much. But I didn't want to break it. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood. There had to be a key. I started to search, my movements methodical and quiet. I checked the drawers in the small kitchenette, under the pillow on the bed, in the pockets of an old coat hanging on a peg by the door. Nothing. Frustration began to build. I felt like I was on the edge of an answer, but the final piece was missing. I sat down at the table, my head in my hands. The silence of the cabin pressed in on me. It wasn't an empty silence. It was full of questions. I looked around the room again, my gaze lingering on the small details. The neat stack of wood by the fireplace. The worn patch on the floor in front of the sink. the way the quilt was folded on the bed. Everything spoke of care, of intention. My grandmother had been here. She had lived in this space. I stood up and walked to the fireplace. I ran my hand along the rough stone of the mantel. As my fingers brushed against the underside of the thick wooden slab, they caught on something. A loose stone. My breath hitched. I pressed it gently. The stone shifted inward, revealing a small, dark cavity. And inside, nestled on a piece of velvet, was a small, delicate brass key. The key to the box. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to fit the tiny key into the lock on the carved wooden box. It turned with a soft, satisfying click. I lifted the lid. The inside was lined with faded blue silk. And it was full of letters, dozens of them, tied in neat bundles with faded ribbon. They were all addressed to me. For Maya, written in my grandmother's familiar, elegant script. The top envelope had a single word written on it. Start here. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. The paper was thin, almost translucent. I unfolded it and began to read. My dearest Maya, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. It means that the world has finally sent you here, to the only real home our family has ever known. I am sorry. I am so sorry for the secrets, for the silence. I need you to understand that every choice I made, every lie I told, was to keep you safe. To give you a chance at a life that was not defined by a ghost. A ghost? I read on, my heart a cold stone in my chest. This cabin, this land, it did not belong to me. It belonged to your grandfather, a man you never met. His name was Thomas Hemlock. He built this place with his own hands. He was a good man, a gentle man. But he had a brother, Cyrus. Cyrus was different. He was charming, but underneath it all, he was rotten with greed. When their parents died, they left this land to be shared between them. Thomas wanted to live here, to build a life. Cyrus wanted to sell it, to strip the timber and move on. The words painted a picture of a family I never knew I had. A grandfather, a great uncle. Cyrus couldn't force a sale, but he found other ways to make Thomas's life a misery. He ran up debts in their shared name, brought dangerous people around. He was trying to squeeze Thomas out. The final straw came when your mother was born. Thomas saw the danger Cyrus posed to his new family. He made a deal. He would sign over his share of a small inheritance their parents had left, everything he had, if Cyrus would disappear and sign a document stating he had no further claim to this land. Cyrus agreed. He took the money and left. I had to stop reading, my head spinning. I had a grandfather, a mother. My grandmother had never spoken of them, not once. It was as if my life had begun with her. I picked up the letter again. We had a few years of peace here. They were the happiest of my life. Your mother grew up in this cabin, running through these woods. But Cyrus's greed was a hungry thing. He burned through the inheritance and came back, claiming the deal was invalid. He said Thomas had tricked him. He threatened us. The law in a place like this, it was slow, and it often sided with the louder man. One night, there was a terrible argument. It spilled out into the yard. Cyrus had been drinking. He had a gun. The letter shook in my hands. Thomas tried to reason with him, but there's no reasoning with a fire. Cyrus shot your grandfather. He killed him, right there in the clearing. He claimed it was an accident, that they were hunting. But I knew the truth. The sheriff, a man who was in Cyrus's pocket, ruled it a tragic accident. No charges were filed. Cyrus became the sole owner of this land. I felt sick. The peaceful silence of the cabin suddenly felt menacing. haunted. I looked out the dusty window, at the quiet clearing, and imagined a horror I couldn't comprehend. I ran, the letter continued. I took your mother, who was just a little girl, and I ran. I couldn't stay here, under his shadow. We lived in hiding, moving from city to city, always looking over our shoulder. Cyrus was a powerful man in his own way, with long, ugly connections. I changed our names. I erased our past. It was the only way to keep your mother safe. And then, when you were born, it was the only way to keep you safe. This was the story of my life. The constant moving, the instability, the feeling of being hunted that I could never name. It wasn't poverty, it was fear. Years passed. I heard through old friends that Cyrus had died. He'd lost the land to debts, sold it to a holding company tied to his criminal associates. But one day, a lawyer found me. A good man, a man who had known your grandfather. He had found the document, the one Cyrus signed giving up his claim. It was ironclad. After a long, quiet legal battle, he got the land back for me. For us. But the danger wasn't gone. The people Cyrus owed money to, they don't just forget. The company that held the deed was a front for a very dangerous organization. They believe this land is theirs. So I kept it a secret. I set up the trust to pay the taxes so no one would come looking for the owner. I couldn't bring you here. It was too dangerous. It was safer for you to be in the system, anonymous, invisible, than to be here with a target on your back. I cried then. I cried for the grandmother I never knew, a woman of immense strength and courage who had lived a life of fear to protect me. I cried for the mother I couldn't remember and the grandfather I'd never met. I cried for the little girl who thought she'd been abandoned, who thought she was worthless. It wasn't abandonment. It was a shield. The weight of her sacrifice was crushing. I spent the rest of the day reading. Letter after letter, she told me the story of our family. She told me about my grandfather's love for the woods, about my mother's laughter. She filled in the vast, empty spaces of my past. In the last letter, the one dated just 3 months before she died, she wrote about the future. The world is changing, Maya. The men who hunted us are old now, or gone. Their organization is weaker, but they have long memories. The development company that now legally owns the front company will eventually come calling. They will want this land. They will offer you money, a lot of it. Enough to make you forget, to start a new life somewhere else. It is the easy path, the safe path. No one would blame you if you took it. Her handwriting was shakier now, the elegant loops less certain. But there is another path. This land is your birthright. It is the last piece of your grandfather, of your mother. It is a place of peace, of strength. It is a place to make a stand. The choice, my dearest Maya, must be yours. I have left you everything I could. In the floorboards, beneath the loose stone in the hearth, you will find what little money I was able to save. It is not much, but it might be enough to begin. Whatever you choose, know that I love you. Know that I have always been with you. Be brave. Your loving grandmother, Eleanor. I sat in the growing twilight. The letters spread on the table before me like a map of a lost country. The cabin was no longer just a building. It was a legacy. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the voices of my family. I went to the hearth. My fingers found the loose stone she mentioned. I pried it up. Beneath it was a small, hollow space, and inside was a metal box. I lifted it out. It was heavy. I opened it. It was filled with cash. Neat stacks of 20s and 50s, held together with rubber bands. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. Enough to get a real apartment, to go to school, to disappear and start over. Enough to take the easy path. Or maybe, just maybe, enough to fight. I closed my eyes, picturing my grandmother's face. The quiet strength in her eyes, the gentle set of her mouth. Be brave. I know some of you watching this have been faced with a choice like that, a moment where you have to decide between the easy road and the right one, between running from your past and turning to face it. It's a heavy, lonely moment. If you're there right now, or if you've ever been there, let me know in the comments. You're not alone in this. This community is built on people who understand that the hardest choices are the ones that define us. Now, let's get back to what happened in that cabin. I stayed up all night, the kerosene lamp casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I didn't sleep. I just sat at the table, the money in its box on one side, the letters on the other, my past and a potential future. By the time the sun began to filter through the trees, casting a pale, gray light into the room, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to run anymore. This place, this small cabin in the woods, was the first real home I'd ever had. It was bought and paid for with the blood and sacrifice of my family. Selling it would be like selling their memory. I would stay. I would fight. The decision settled in my soul with a strange, quiet calm. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but for the first time, it was accompanied by something else: resolve. The next morning, I walked the miles back into Northwood. The journey felt different this time. I wasn't a lost girl seeking refuge. I was a woman with a purpose. I bought supplies at the general store: cleaning products, food, work gloves, a new lantern. The woman behind the counter, the one who had helped me before, gave me a curious, friendly smile. "Decided to stay a while?" she asked. "I'm not leaving," I said, and the words felt solid, true. I used some of the money to buy a cheap, used bicycle, which made the trip back and forth much easier. The first few weeks were pure physical labor. I scrubbed the cabin from top to bottom. I washed the windows until they sparkled, letting the full, green light of the forest pour in. I beat the dust from the quilt and the old rugs. I patched the leaky spot in the roof with tar and shingles I hauled from town. I learned to use the hand pump for water, to build a fire that would last through the night. I cleared the overgrown path and planted a small garden in the clearing. Every task was hard. My muscles ached. My hands were covered in blisters and scratches. But with every scrubbed floorboard and every weed pulled, I felt like I was reclaiming not just the cabin, but myself. I was building a life with my own two hands, just as my grandfather had. I was proving to myself, and to the ghosts that lingered here, that I was worthy of their sacrifice. I explored the woods, following faint trails I imagined my mother had once walked. I found a small, clear stream, Sparrow Creek itself, and a grove of ancient hemlock trees that stood like silent sentinels. This land was a part of me. Its roots were tangled with my own. The quiet and the solitude, which would have terrified me a month ago, became a comfort. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I had the letters. I had the presence of my family all around me. I felt their strength. I was living in their memory. Just as my grandmother had predicted, the letter arrived about a month after I did. It was delivered by Silas, who handed it to me with a grim look on his face. "Knew they'd come sniffing around eventually," he muttered. The envelope was thick, expensive cream-colored paper, with the embossed logo of a law firm, Blackwood Development Group. My hands were steady as I opened it. The language was polite, corporate, but the meaning was clear. They knew the property had a new heir. They were aware of its rustic condition, and the significant tax burden it represented, a lie, I knew. They were prepared to make a generous, all-cash offer to take it off my hands. A number with so many zeros it made me feel dizzy. It was life-changing money, the easy path, the safe path. The letter included the name and number of a local lawyer they had retained to handle the transaction, a Mr. Davies. "We look forward to a swift and amicable resolution," it concluded. Amicable. The word felt like a threat. I knew I couldn't face this alone. My grandmother had mentioned a lawyer, the one who had helped her reclaim the land. His name was in one of the letters, Arthur Pendleton. A quick search at the library revealed he was retired, but his small practice in the county seat was now run by his daughter, a woman named Clara Pendleton. I made an appointment. Clara's office was nothing like the one described in the developer's letter. It was a small, cluttered room above a bakery, filled with stacks of books and the smell of old paper and fresh bread. Clara was in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened patiently as I told her my story, spreading my grandmother's letters and the deed out on her desk. I watched her face carefully, looking for any sign of disbelief, but she just nodded, her expression serious. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. She picked up the deed, handling it with a reverence that surprised me. "I remember my father working on this case," she said softly. "He called it the Hemlock Ghost. He said it was one of the most important things he ever did, getting this land back for Eleanor. He always wondered what became of her and of you." She looked at me, her gaze direct. "Blackwood Development is not a simple company, Maya. They are the public face of the same organization that Cyrus Hemlock was involved with. They launder money through real estate. They are ruthless. They will not give up easily." The fear I had been holding at bay returned, cold and sharp. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They made an offer, a lot of money." "Of course they did," Clara said, a wry smile touching her lips. "That's how they work. They offer you a fortune, something no sane person would refuse. If you take it, you're gone, and they get what they want without a fight. If you refuse, they start to apply pressure. They'll challenge the deed. They'll claim eminent domain through corrupt local officials. They will try to bury you in legal fees and scare you until you break." She leaned forward, her eyes locking with mine. "But you have something they don't. You have the truth. And you have this." She tapped the deed. "My father made sure this was ironclad. Your grandmother was the rightful heir, and you are her sole successor. Their claim is based on fraudulent documents from a criminal. Legally, they don't have a leg to stand on." "So I can win?" I asked, a flicker of hope igniting in my chest. "We can win," she corrected me. "But it will be a fight. It will be long, and it will be expensive, and it might get ugly." She looked at the offer letter from Blackwood. "This money they're offering, it would solve a lot of your problems." She was testing me. She needed to know I was serious. I thought of my grandmother's words, "Be brave." "This cabin is not for sale," I said, and my voice was stronger than I ever thought it could be. Clara Pendleton smiled, a real, genuine smile this time. "Good," she said. "Then let's get to work." The fight was everything Clara had warned it would be. Blackwood's lawyers filed a flurry of motions, challenging the validity of my grandfather's original will, the legality of the document Cyrus had signed, even my own identity as Eleanor's granddaughter. They were trying to bleed me dry, emotionally and financially. The money my grandmother had left, which had seemed like a fortune, dwindled at an alarming rate as legal fees mounted. There were days when the pressure was immense, when the thought of that easy money was a siren song. I'd walk out into the woods, to the creek, and just breathe. I would reread my grandmother's letters, drawing strength from her words, from her resilience. I was not just fighting for a piece of land, I was fighting for her. I was honoring her sacrifice. The community, which had at first been wary of the newcomer, slowly started to rally around me. Silas would drop off extra groceries sometimes, refusing payment. The woman at the general store started a small collection jar on the counter, labeled Maya's Legal Fund. People would stop me in town, offering words of encouragement. They remembered the Hemlocks. They knew what Cyrus had been, and they respected the quiet dignity of Thomas and Eleanor. They saw Blackwood Development for what it was, an outside force trying to swallow a piece of their history. It wasn't just my fight anymore, it was theirs too. One afternoon, Clara called me. There was a new urgency in her voice. They've made a new offer, Maya, a final one. It's double the first, but it comes with a condition. What condition? I asked, my stomach tightening. You have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You can never speak of the Hemlock family, Cyrus's criminal ties, or the history of this land ever again. They want to bury the story, not just buy the property. It was the ultimate test. They weren't just offering me money, they were offering me silence. A chance to erase the past, to take the money and run, just as my grandmother had been forced to do. All I had to do was betray the very memory I was fighting to protect. I could see the two paths stretching out before me, clearer than ever. One was paved with gold, leading to a comfortable, easy life. But it was a life built on a lie, on an erasure. The other was a rocky, uncertain path, the one I was already on. It offered no guarantees, only the quiet integrity of standing your ground. Tell them no, I said to Clara, my voice clear and firm. Tell them I'll see them in court. The court case was set for the fall. The weeks leading up to it were the most stressful of my life. But something had shifted in me. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I had a lawyer who believed in me, a community that supported me, and the unshakable conviction that I was doing the right thing. I had found my place to make a stand. The night before the first hearing, I sat on the porch of the cabin, the cool autumn air crisp against my skin. The forest was quiet, the sky a brilliant tapestry of stars. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From a lonely room in the city to this small patch of earth that held my entire history. I had come here looking for a shelter, a temporary refuge. But I had found something so much more. I had found a home. I had found myself. The cabin wasn't just wood and stone anymore. It was a testament to resilience, a symbol of the enduring power of love and sacrifice. It was the place where I had stopped running. The legal battle raged for nearly a year. It was grueling. Blackwood's lawyers were slick and aggressive, trying to paint me as an opportunist, my grandmother as a deluded old woman. But Clara was brilliant. She was methodical, relentless. She presented the evidence, the signed document from Cyrus, the sheriff's questionable report on my grandfather's death, witness testimonies from old-timers in Sparrow Creek who remembered Cyrus's violent nature. The turning point came when she produced a sworn affidavit from a retired accountant who had once worked for Cyrus's associates. He confirmed, under penalty of perjury, that the holding company was a known front and that their claim to the Hemlock land was based on manufactured debt and intimidation. The judge, a stern but fair woman, listened to everything. In the end, her ruling was swift and decisive. She upheld the original deed. The land was mine, free and clear. The claims made by Blackwood Development were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never bring the case again. I won. Walking out of the courthouse that day was surreal. The sun was bright, the air felt clean. Clara hugged me, her professional composure finally breaking into a wide, triumphant smile. Silas was there, along with a dozen other people from Sparrow Creek. They cheered as I walked down the steps. I wasn't just Maya Vance, the girl from the system. I was Maya Hemlock of Sparrow Creek. I belonged. Life at the cabin settled into a new rhythm. The constant threat was gone, replaced by a deep and abiding sense of peace. The work didn't stop. There was always a fence to mend, a garden to tend, a chimney to sweep. But now it was work born of love, not of desperation. I used the last of my grandmother's money to have a proper well and septic system installed, and to run electricity to the cabin. I kept the kerosene lamps for the ambiance, but the convenience of a light switch felt like a miracle. I started selling some of the vegetables and herbs from my garden at the Northwood Farmers Market. I wasn't getting rich, but I was making enough to live on. I was self-sufficient. I was free. I often think about the two paths. The life I could have had if I'd taken the money. A comfortable apartment, a fancy car, a life without struggle. But I know, with a certainty that settles deep in my bones, that it would have been an empty life. It would have been a continuation of the waiting room, just with nicer furniture. The real inheritance my grandmother left me wasn't the land or the cabin or the money. It was the choice. She gave me the chance to discover my own strength, to fight for something that mattered. She gave me back my history, my name, my home. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I take her letters out of the carved wooden box and read them again. I feel her presence in the quiet hum of the forest, in the warmth of the fire, in the solid walls of the home her husband built and she protected. Her sacrifice was not in vain. Her story will not be forgotten. It lives on here, in this place. It lives on in me. This journey taught me that home isn't just a place you live. It's a place you fight for. It's a place that holds your story. It's the ground where you finally decide to plant your feet and say, no more running. It's about legacy, not just property. Maybe you have a place like that in your life. Maybe it's a relationship, a dream, a value you refuse to sell. It's the thing that defines you when all the easy options are on the table. What is the cabin you've had to fight for in your own life? I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments below. Your stories matter here. They are a part of the community we're building together. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in second chances and the power of standing your ground, consider subscribing to the channel. We're all just trying to find our way back to the places we belong. And sometimes, the map is hidden in the most unexpected of places, waiting for us to be brave enough to follow it. Thank you for listening.